With the 8-bit systems starting to show their age at the end of the 1980s, many gamers found themselves wondering what would be the next step. How do you top a juggernaut like the NES? Sega's response would be the introduction of the Genesis. Driven by the promise of arcade-quality graphics in the comfort of my own living room, the Genesis's power would deliver on all fronts. But little did I know the true power that was hiding underneath that sleek exterior. Welcome to RGB203, where we're going to be looking at how to get the best picture out of your Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X. Ready? Let's go.
The Sega Mega Drive was released in North America in August 1989 as the Sega Genesis. Early on, the Genesis was popular for its high-quality ports that were touted as bringing the arcade experience home. Based on Sega's powerful System 16 arcade hardware, the console has a palette of 512 colors and can display up to 61 colors at once, at a resolution of 320 by 224, or in some instances, 256 by 224. You might notice extraneous graphical information in the overscan around the gameplay area. Stuff like a solid colored border and these little blinking dot things. This was out of sight on your old CRT, but will be on full display on your HD TV. But don't worry, this is completely normal. Conventional wisdom suggests that there are two ways to hook up a Sega Genesis: RF or composite video. And unfortunately, much of the Genesis's graphical prowess is muddied as a result of it having some of the absolute worst looking composite video of any console. If you're looking to take things to the next level, it's possible to modify the Genesis internally and install S-Video output. Several years ago, Corey actually bought a Genesis that had been modified with S-Video, but he had a number of issues with it and couldn't get it to work reliably. Now, that's not to say that all S-Video Genesis mods are shoddy, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Because we soon learned that despite the Genesis's infamously poor composite video quality, it actually already has something even better than S-Video. Much like its predecessor, the Sega Master System, the large 8-pin DIN on the back natively supports RGB video. And best of all, the RGB signal from the Sega Genesis is razor sharp. Despite generating some of the worst looking composite video, I'd say that the Genesis outputs some of the most striking RGB video that I've seen on any console. We use an external video scaler called the Framemeister, which can take analog video, including RGB, and processes it much more quickly and cleanly than your TV's internal video scaler. Or you could use BNC breakout cables with a professional CRT monitor. Look for cables that are wired up for C-Sync for the cleanest results. Learn more about Sync in RGB203. Now those are the basics, but when it comes to the Genesis, there are quite a number of other options and considerations.
We've previously mentioned HD Retrovision, who have put a ton of research into converting the RGB signal of the Sega Genesis and SNES into what you'll recognize as standard RCA component cables. We've got our hands on the final circuits for these cables, and we think it's an excellent cost-effective option for people who want to tap the Genesis's RGB signal without additional expensive hardware. It's not an HD scaling solution, but it's a heck of a lot cleaner than a composite video signal. Or you could use it on a CRT with component input, which looks amazing. There's also all-in-one conversion solutions, like SCART to component boxes, or the Retro Clarity, which combines functionality for multiple consoles into a single unit. But again, these are not HD scalers. Now, when it comes to the console itself, there are some things to keep in mind with the first model of the Sega Genesis. Possibly the quirkiest thing about the Genesis is that despite it supporting stereo audio, it only outputs mono audio from its AV port on the back. But there is a workaround. On the front side of the unit, there's a headphone jack that outputs glorious stereo sound. RGB cable makers have integrated a 3.5mm jack into their SCART and JP21 cables, so just plug it in, crank up the volume slider, and you're good to go. Next, if you're a big fan of Sonic the Hedgehog 2's split screen mode, then this one is for you. Have you ever noticed how this mode looks ultra sharp? Well, that's because programmers had to pull off some tricks to get it working, and it runs in a special 480i mode. If you're using an external scaler, then you might not be able to get this mode to display correctly. Look what happens when the XRGB Mini Framemeister gets to it. You might notice that older units of the original Genesis model have the silly phrase high definition graphics emblazoned across the top. If you're wondering whether this matters when choosing a Genesis for RGB, I wouldn't worry too much about it. There were several revisions to the internal board, each with their own idiosyncrasies, but they all performed nearly the same. In fact, most of the differences have more to do with a slight difference in audio tone that's not quite as pleasing in later models. But that's a whole other can of worms, and we'll have to cover it in another episode. Which brings us to jail bars. Jail what? This is a term you might see in RGB discussions from time to time. You see, on certain colors you'll see these vertical lines of alternating lighter and darker colors, creating a pattern, which has affectionately been given the name jail bars. The Genesis shows them on darker colored blue shades most prominently, but they're also an issue on a few other colors as well. Thankfully, as the Genesis hardware evolved, this would become less pronounced in further revisions. However, if you want to get rid of them completely, then you'll have to resort to a simple but destructive internal modification to the composite video trace.
As we've mentioned, there could be slight differences on the inside of consoles that otherwise look very similar on the outside. But aside from that, the Genesis has 3 major redesigns, each with their own pros and cons. The smaller Model 2 Genesis looks much more like a 90s console, and features a brand new port on the back that not only integrates stereo audio without the need for a headphone connector, but also a completely new form factor. Thankfully, it still outputs beautiful RGB. But when shopping for cables, keep in mind that you need to buy specifically for a Model 1 or Model 2 console. In 1995, after optimizing the Genesis hardware so thoroughly, Sega was able to shrink it down, slap on an LCD screen, and make it portable. They called it the Sega Nomad, and it was released only in the United States. Not only is it a fully functioning portable Genesis, it can also be connected to a TV with its AV port located at the top, which conveniently uses the exact same cables as the Model 2 Genesis, and has the same capabilities, including the ability to natively output RGB. However, depending on your cables or equipment, some people have noted issues when using C-Sync with the Nomad, so it might be a safer bet to buy cables using Sync on Composite for RGB instead. Arriving well after its heyday, the last major hardware revision is imaginatively named the Genesis 3. This tiny budget console saw the removal of its native RGB output. Though if this is your favorite Genesis, RGB is still possible through modification. Also removed, every facet of the Model 1 and Model 2's famous expandability.
Sega decided it would be in their best interest to expand the power of their console by using hardware add-ons. CD technology seemed like the next logical step for Sega.
Power up.
The Sega CD was released in 1992 at a steep $300. Without the limited confines of a cartridge and boasting expanded audio capabilities, Sega welcomed us to the next level. Another big addition to this console was its hardware scaling and rotation, which brought it on par with the Super NES. Okay, the good news is that since the Sega CD just plugs directly into the expansion slot of the Sega Genesis Model 1 or 2, it utilizes the Genesis's RGB capable video output. Even though it requires its own AC adapter and expands the system's graphical capabilities, you don't have to do anything different in terms of video output. Everything looks amazing all around. But the extra clarity that RGB affords certainly doesn't do any favors for the add-on signature full motion video titles. Sega would release a remodel of the Sega CD with a form factor more appropriate for the recent released Genesis Model 2. This newer version does not have any downfalls compared to the first model. In addition, Sega would also release a compact unit called the CDX, which consolidated Genesis and Sega CD tech into one body. This system uses Genesis 2 cables and is completely capable of native RGB. They'd also license this technology to other companies who would create their own redesigned units, such as the Xi, aka the Wonder Mega. These are also capable of outputting RGB natively. Despite the enhancement that the Sega CD afforded, the console was still limited in a variety of ways. Most notably that it was still held to the Genesis' original color palette. With Sega's next generation console still a ways away, they released the cartridge-based Sega 32X in 1994, which supplemented thousands of colors and some serious processing power. This unit plugs into the cartridge slot of the Genesis and has its own video output. It utilizes a Genesis 2 style AV port, so it can use the exact same cable. What it does need is a smaller cable that connects the Genesis AV output to an input on the 32X. Naturally, this cable will need to be compatible with your hardware. So if you have a Genesis Model 1, then get a cable that has the larger DIN on it. Oh, and one more thing. Don't forget that the Genesis is capable of playing Master System games in full RGB using the power-based converter peripheral. Check out RGB201 for more information on that.
While the Genesis is one of the easiest systems to get excellent RGB video out of, multiple revisions and hardware expansions do change the system's capabilities and create some interesting considerations. But if you're just worried about what cables to buy, all you have to do is check which model it's for and you'll be fine. So as we finish up here, select titles from the Genesis library have been featured in just a ton of compilations and digital releases over the years. Is it worth bothering with RGB and real Genesis hardware? Well, here's a look. We'll let you decide.